guys, the business we're in is sports. We talk sports, we write sports, we watch sports. When you came to this country, Michael, how much different was your viewing habits? How much different was your lifestyle in watching sports and communicating about sports than when you were in the United States?
Well, the first thing I did was immerse myself in the morgue, the library of the Montreal Gazette, and read about Ted Blackman writing about everything. Ted Blackman was a terrific sports writer at the Montreal Gazette. The 72 Summit Series, I watched on public television, Channel 13 in New York, in my dorm room at Rutgers on an 8-inch TV. So it was just hockey. It wasn't anything else that Canadians feel about those 8 games. So I had to really immerse myself in the history of the Montreal Canadiens. I had a passing knowledge, but not a deep knowledge. The other thing that happened, I'd come off being a columnist at a newspaper in North Jersey, and I'd covered the Yankees. So I'd been used to baseball and covered a lot of baseball. Well, in '79, after the Canadiens won the Cup for the 4th straight time, the Expos were exploding. That was a great year, '79. So baseball was a thing, and I didn't have to watch as much hockey, although you're never far from it. And I dare say there was a period in the early '80s when the Expos were bigger than the Canadiens, if you can imagine that now. So the one thing I didn't ever really get accustomed to was the CFL. And I thought, why not? Because I love sports and I love basically all sports. So why was I resistant to the CFL? So I thought about it, and what bothered me initially was that it didn't strike me as football-esque, because football in my mind was very regimented. It's very strict. In the CFL, with all the motion before the snap and with the big end zones and the yard off the ball, it seemed kind of loosey-goosey to me. It didn't seem in what in my mind was football-esque. Now, I love 1 foot in bounds. I think the NFL should rush to that. And so it took me much longer to look at the CFL and take it with the same amount of seriousness that I took the NHL or MLB.
Actually, and in that early '80s period, in many ways, we will look back in the history of the CFL as those are the glory years of the CFL. When you think that Warren Moon and the Edmonton Eskimos were in the midst of 5 in a row, and there were 60,000 people at Commonwealth Stadium every night, and even, dare I say, the old Argos were drawing 50,000 at Exhibition Stadium, and to think in this day that they can't draw 15,000 on most nights is truly amazing. But just before I get to Richard on the same question, did you, particularly when it came to baseball, did you have to write differently in Montreal than you would say in Jersey about it? Was the knowledge base the same?
Oh no, not at all. I mean, these were sophisticated fans. I wrote it as I would write anywhere. In fact, one of the things that bothered me was the Blue Jays broadcasts. I guess it was Chevrier and Kubek.
Right.
Were over-explaining. It's like Toronto hadn't seen baseball before, which is, of course, nonsense. This international league team here, there forever. And I just said, oh, wait a minute. I mean, why are you, treating your audience like, 8-year-olds? So I noted that, but no, I mean, people in Montreal and the Expos were a big draw, and you could just write it as you would and maybe do some offbeat stories that might have been informative to people, such as, what goes on in a mound visit and what's said in various things, or, how do you steal a sign? And maybe I wouldn't have written some of that in for the Record in Hackensack, New Jersey, but they were well received. But this was a sophisticated baseball audience, and I think Toronto was as well.
Yeah. Richard, what about you? When you made the transition, now weren't necessarily writing as much. You were forced to be aware of things on a daily basis, Monday to Friday. How much of a challenge was it for you and I will say it, to speak Canadian?
Yeah, significant for me.
Because there is a difference.
There's a difference for sure. And to be on air was a significant challenge on that. It was the biggest challenge for me. And what I had to do as best I could was to just immerse myself in as much television watching in this market as well as reading. Where I had to amp my knowledge up significantly was the NHL. And it never matched everybody else at the station. Let's just be honest. I mean, I couldn't have the recall of talking about Daryl Sittler or the '93 Leafs team. That's just a reality. That wasn't part of my upbringing. So I had to do my best to sort of get as much currency as I could on the NHL. And then there were just going to be things that I just really was never going to catch up on, like the university system here in terms of the athletics. I was never going to be able to tell you like.
Hold on. There are athletics at university.
I'm saying like I'm never going to be able to tell you about Western's greatest football moments or something like that. But I will say
most Canadians can't either. By the way,
that's the good news on that. You'll find two things interesting. One, at least in Toronto, if you are willing to pay the money, you really can watch everything. Like you get so many American broadcasts as well as as well as the NHL broadcast. So you can really educate yourself rather quickly if your cable package is significant. And then just as a sports media nerd, John and Mike, the thing that I really love and I still love to this day is I'm so fascinated by how TSN, how Sportsnet, and how the CBC cover sports versus how the Americans do. And particularly, let's say what's the CBC in terms of the Olympics. Like that, it is just so fascinating to me as a media junkie to see how different the coverage is. And the coverage is massively different. Farber can talk about this as well. It is a philosophically different way to cover sports. Some of that, when it comes to the CBC, has to do with a public broadcaster versus NBC, a commercial broadcaster. But that has been really kind of I would even call it a joy for me, is I feel very fortunate that I now have, over the last 5+ years, I've just seen a different way to present sports in a country. And it's really interesting. And it's very different, quite frankly, than the Americans.
Well, one of my problems is I went to 18 Olympics, so I didn't get to watch TV in the way that you did.
Well, Mike, I was there. I was with you for 7 of them, Mike. How soon you forget?
No, that's true. Wearing that ugly windbreaker, as I recall. But yeah, I mean, if you watch broadcasts even of now, you see it's much fairer. It's more global. It's not only about Canadian athletes. Well, where NBC, it's some of the high-end athletes seem to be partners.
Waving the flag here for you, Mike, the American flag.
Everything is seen through the prism of the Stars and Stripes. And while there's more emphasis, obviously, on Canadian athletes here, I think the coverage is far more measured and much fairer, and using a word I used in the first half of your podcast, John, globalist.
Well, I think, as the token Canadian on the show.
Whoa.
Oh no, sorry.
Canadian too, citizen 6 years.
I apologize, Mike.
Resident since '79. I just didn't get off the boat.
I will do what every Canadian does. I'm sorry. One of the reasons that we began that way is that we weren't very good at Olympics.
Yeah, sure.
So if we didn't, that for the longest time, I mean, the Olympics before you got to Canada, Michael, in Montreal, I mean, we celebrated the great Olympic triumph of Greg Joy.
Yeah,
who was our single silver medalist at the Montreal Games. On the last day of the games.
the most viewed Canadian athlete, because he was on when CBC would sign off every night.
Right.
You'd see Greg Joy. Nobody, no athlete in this country, including Wayne Gretzky, has been seen more often than Greg Joy. I got here in 79, 78 at the Commonwealth Games. Was it Graham Smith, a swimmer?
Yeah.
Won a ton of medals. And that was great. He was celebrated at the Commonwealth Games. If you look at the evolution of Canadian sports since my time here, so it's 40 plus years, I mean, Canada, if not a world power, is pretty close.
Yeah.
And it's not just in hockey. I mean, MVPs in basketball, and Steve Nash, great Olympians in a ton of sports. It's just been remarkable to see.